I'm so excited for my daddy's podcast, and it's going to start right now.
Welcome to Volume 2 of the Lessons for Success show, the podcast heard by nearly 3,000 students, teachers, coaches, and others across the world. I'm your host, Adam Wardlaw, a middle school science teacher and high school football coach in South Carolina, USA. The goal of each episode is to share the stories of various people and the life lessons they've learned along their journeys. Before we get started, be sure you're following the show on all of our social media platforms, including Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and yes, even TikTok. Simply search L4S Show. Just remember, it's the number 4. Also, be sure to subscribe to the Lessons for Success Show YouTube channel, where all episodes are uploaded. If you're an educator, coach, or business leader, feel free to send the links to these episodes directly to your students or employees so they can benefit as well. Without further ado, let's start the show.
Daddy, who's the guest on your podcast this week?
This week's guest is Tim Kight. Tim is the founder of Focus 3, a firm whose mission is to help companies around the world align the power of leadership, culture, and behavior to achieve next-level results. A dynamic communicator, Tim focuses on the critical factors that distinguish great organizations from average ones. He delivers a powerful message on the mindset and skills at the heart of individual and organizational performance. Most recently, Tim has worked closely with Urban Meyer and the Ohio State football team as the Buckeyes leadership coach. His work with Ohio State has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Sports Illustrated, and ESPN. Mr. Kight is the author of several high-impact training programs: The R Factor, Lead Now, The Power of Culture, Winning, and Attitude Matters. Enjoy!
Well, thanks, Adam, for having me on the podcast. Love to have these conversations. And just briefly about myself, I was born in Central Ohio, Columbus area, played football, ran track in high school, and really very committed to athletics and loved the academics as well. And then when my senior year of high school, I was fortunate enough to be the national champion in my track event. And that was the 330 intermediate hurdles. And that gave me the opportunity to pretty much choose where I went to college, and I chose Ohio State because born and raised in Columbus, and you kind of live in the shadow of Ohio State. There's strong gravitational pull. So I went to Ohio State, but I discovered early on that, at least back then, that Ohio State wasn't as committed to track and field. So I transferred to UCLA. And now Ohio State's got a fantastic track program, but back then it was just a little bit different. And then UCLA was very instrumental, and I've told this story in a number of their podcasts, but I ran track, but the locker room for track and field was in the same building as basketball, and the coach at the time was John Wooden. And I had the opportunity to interface with Coach Wooden kind of informally over the course of my 3 years at UCLA. And while he was there, he won his 9th and 10th national championships, and that was just an incredible feat, a performance that was very unique and obviously got my attention. And he had given me some advice and some thoughts about leadership, about building the team environment, culture, if you will, about the individual attributes of exceptional performance. And that really sparked in me, Adam, a hunger, a great desire to understand, where does elite performance come from? What's the source of, how do people who consistently perform at the upper levels of their talent, how do they do that? How do you get that? How do you keep that in your life? If you've lost it, how do you get it back? If you're a coach, how do you build that in an environment, or a business leader? How do you build a culture that brings out the best in other people? And that's been my life quest. So ever since I graduated from UCLA, way back in the 70s, that's been what I've focused my life on this entire time. And so that's really what I do. What I do for a living is I observe and I document the mindset and behavior patterns of exceptional performers. I'll repeat that. I observe and I document the mindset, way of thinking, and behavior patterns, way of acting, way of behaving of people who consistently perform at the upper levels of their potential. And I do it in business. I do it for sports. I do it in schools. I get to work with C-suite. I get to work with high school students. I get to work with college and pro athletes. It's fantastic. And one of the things I've noticed, and then I'll throw this back to you, and that's what my firm, Focus 3, is my company. And that's what we do. It's what our firm does. We're hired by organizations or teams to come in and evaluate their culture and the way they go about leadership and the behavioral patterns of people, and we help them go to the next level. And it's the best job in the world. And I love, like I said, I love being in the different domains. I love being in a high school classroom. I love being in the locker room of a college football team. I love being with and just in a school assembly, because the principles that we teach, they simply work. And the one last thing, and I'll throw it back to you, that I've learned in this journey is that elite performance is the result of decisions that you make, not talent that you do or don't have. But elite performance isn't about your talent. It's about your work ethic. It's about your mindset. And I have a statement that I make that talent is a gift, elite is a choice. And every person listening to this podcast is capable of building skill that they don't have talent for. And I think that's one of the most incredible truths that I know of about human performance. Every person listening to this podcast, every business person, every teacher, every student, every coach is capable of building skill that they don't have talent for. That's the good news. Now, the more challenging news is building that skill is hard. It takes a lot of hard work. It takes a mindset, but it's still a truth. And that's really what my life is about, is the opportunity to teach the skills that help people make the decisions and do the work to achieve at the next level.
You know, some of the people who are listening are teachers in classrooms, they're principals of school buildings, they are business leaders. If they're trying to evaluate their performance and really maximize what they're getting out of their organization, what does that process kind of look like, you know, from start to finish? What's that first step for the first step that they've got to take in order to get going on this journey of maximizing what they're able to do?
Well, I think we've definitely learned this, that the power of culture, the power of the environment on the team. When I say team, I can be a business team or a classroom or an actual athletic team or the school building itself, meaning the high school, middle school, elementary school, that the culture is critically important. And so step number one, I think, for building an exceptional environment is to clarify what culture do you want? What are the standards that you want in your culture? And a culture is, again, just the core beliefs and behavioral standards that you want on your team. And that's step number one, is make those standards exceptionally clear. We facilitate a process called a culture playbook, where we help organizations or teams clarify their culture and put it in writing and then communicate it to everyone. But that's step number one, is make sure that everyone is crystal clear about what are the core beliefs and the key behavioral standards of the team, of the business, of the school, of the classroom. And then there's something we call discipline over default. Imagine a line, Adam, drawn from left to right, and above the line there's a statement, discipline, and below the line there's a statement called default. You know, we talked earlier, and back in 2013, Urban Meyer hired me to come on board and be the leadership coach for Ohio State football. And I still work with Ryan Day at Ohio State. I still function in that capacity. And the line there represents, above it is behavior that wins, and below it is behavior that doesn't. So discipline wins, default does not. Discipline is always getting better. Default's being stuck at some average version of yourself. And so we talk about discipline over default. And what a culture statement should do is clarify what discipline looks like. It should clarify what winning behavior looks like in the classroom, on the team, in the organization, on the shop floor. Is clarify, this is what we're after. This is the mindset and behavior patterns above the line, discipline driven. This is what we're looking for in our organization. And then if people begin to self-evaluate whether or not they are behaving in alignment with those cultural standards. That's step number one. And communicating that and making sure everyone is crystal clear about what that looks like. And then from a leadership perspective, I'll add this, it's critically important that leaders not just communicate the culture, but they live the culture and set an example. And whether it's a teacher or the coach or the general manager or a CEO or a parent, is leaders' job is not just to say it, but it's to do it. It's not just to communicate the culture verbally, but to actually behave the culture. And we say this about leadership: it is people feel your attitude, they see your action, and they hear your words. And that's the leader's job. And so I'll just stop there for a moment. That would be the first opening steps of creating this environment that brings out the best in everyone. Clarify the culture with exceptional clarity in writing, then communicate it, and then live it and set an example. Then make sure people understand the difference between discipline over default. And then there's some tools that we teach, but I'll just stop there and you can ask any questions about that. But that's the starting point.
That was awesome. Kind of one of the things that popped in my mind when you're talking about becoming self-aware in terms of the leader who's in charge, and they're kind of doing this evaluation of what they're doing and what they want to be. What do you usually find as some of the more difficult parts of that process when you're first getting started? Because a lot of people don't necessarily think they have culture problems. What are some of the roadblocks or bumps in the road that you traditionally see when you're working with these different organizations?
Now, are you talking about challenges for individual self-awareness or challenges for a group not being aware of their culture?
I guess we can dive into both. I guess coming from if I'm in a position of leadership, what are some things I need to go ahead and expect to be encountering that might be uncomfortable for me? And then also when my organization is going through this, what are some things that we might encounter and should expect to have to overcome during this process?
Well, one of the really great things about the culture playbook that I just articulated, and then this discipline over default, is it lends itself very easily to self-evaluation and group evaluation. And if a culture playbook's well written and you get a little bit of dialogue going on, it's not difficult to have an assessment just through conversation. So when we do a workshop, we will explain, a big slide comes up on the screen, says discipline over default. And then we explain what discipline-driven behavior is and what default-driven behavior is. And before we do the assessment, we say, now keep in mind that the number one default behavior that most people engage in is something we call BCD, which is blame, complain, defend. That when things don't go the way you want, you blame other people, you complain about things and defend yourself. And we talk about BCD being social, about it being popular, about it being easy, and about it not working. It's not effective, and yet it's very common. While you and I are recording this podcast, we're at home because of the coronavirus that's pandemic around the world, and we're real concerned about transmission of the coronavirus. So we're social distancing and all that kind of stuff. There's a worse virus out there than coronavirus. And that's the virus of BCD. It's people pass it. It's contagious. It's very contagious. People tend to pass it on to other people. So discipline over default. Then we have people self-evaluate, and we'll have them articulate. So how many of you engage in BCD? Well, I'll ask a classroom, or I'll ask a group of people, or a team. And virtually everyone, Adam, raises their hand, because we've all done it. Some do it a lot, but everybody's done it. So I'll go to the whiteboard, and on one part of the whiteboard, I'll write down BCD. Okay, that's a default behavior that we all acknowledge that we sometimes engage in. What else do we do that's default behavior? And I'll ask people, so like, what do you do when you're on default? And every single time, whether it's a football coaching staff or a basketball coaching staff or employees in a shop floor or teachers or students, people start articulating, well, sometimes and then a list of behaviors go up. And all of a sudden we're done talking, and there's like 12, 13, 14, 15 behaviors that people have self-acknowledged they engage in that are below the line default behaviors. And I'll stop right there and say, you know what? Now look at that list. And I get angry sometimes. I'm not a very good listener. I engage in BCD, and sometimes I withdraw, and I'm indifferent, and I don't really care, and I don't pay attention to what's going on. And sometimes I'm late. And people, again, this is self-identified behaviors. And then we'll look at that pattern of behaviors, and not everyone does all of those all the time, but some of us do it some of the time. And my point is this: when I say to the room, to the classroom, to the team, to the organization, to the extent that you do that, That's your culture. And you can hear a pin drop in the room when I say that, Adam, because everyone goes, yeah, you're right. We do that sometimes. And yeah. And they immediately recognize that's not a great environment. Now, here's the good news. I also say, when you're discipline driven and above the line, what do? When you're operating at the best version of yourself, tell me what that looks like. And I do the exact same thing. And they'll write down, well, I solve problems. I don't complain, I solve. And I lean and I listen very well. I'm an encourager, or I work hard, and I'm proactive, and people list discipline behaviors. And the same thing, I look at the cluster of behaviors and I'll say, now, when you behave like that, what's it like? And they go, yeah, that's best version of me and us. Exactly. To the extent you do that, that's your culture. Then I step back and I say, now, the journey we're about to go on is I point to default, do less of that. They point to discipline and do more of that. That's our journey. And zero confusion, Adam, about what we're talking about.
Well,
is that clear? Is that clear?
Yeah, and it sounds like you kind of achieved that through forcing people to go through that metacognition, where they're really thinking about how they think about situations, which it's an extremely high form of thinking. And it's kind of like in a classroom where a student can figure out a solution on their own. That's something they're going to remember how to do that solution more than likely, or what it took to do that. So I think how you're gauging members of a team, organization, whatever, I think that's what helps create that buy-in for the process going forward with this culture overhaul or revitalization, whatever you want to call it. So kind of what's that next step after we kind of identified and figured out what we want, what the vision is, here's what our behaviors are going to be in order to get there. What's that next step in this process look like?
Yeah, you're asking good questions. So the next step is provide skills to move from default to discipline. We don't call them behavior skills. That's the next big step. And we teach you read about this in Urban's book, which is entitled Above the Line, and it's what we teach it all over the country. It's the R factor. It's the equation E plus R equals O. And that is a skill set. Let me back up. There's one other thing that we teach along the way, just before we teach the R factor, is we teach everyone the principle of 20 square feet. We draw a big box and we say school, and then inside a smaller box says classroom, and then a smaller box still says 20 square feet. Or it says business, big box, big square, and then a smaller box says business unit, and then the next box says 20 square feet. 20 square feet is a metaphor that represents the fact that every person has a sphere of ownership, that everyone has a sphere of ownership of the culture and performance of the team that they're on, whether it's a business team, a school team, or an athletic team. And the fact of 20 square feet is inside your 20 square feet, you have 100% control, and outside your 20 square feet, you have impact. So control on the inside and impact on the outside. And most people, unfortunately, have abdicated ownership of their 20 square feet. And they spend more time complaining about stuff on the outside rather than owning themselves on the inside. But what we want to awaken them to is everyone is a builder of culture. Culture happens 20 square feet at a time. And despite the fact we put such an emphasis on the culture playbook, documents don't build a culture. The culture playbook isn't the culture. The culture is the extent to which you follow the playbook. Because you can have a playbook and not do it, right? You can have a playbook and not follow it in your 20 square feet. We then teach 20 square feet, want everyone to understand that they own their 20 square feet and they are responsible for how they behave in their 20 square feet, and what they do within that sphere of ownership has an impact on the team, or the classroom, or the business that they're in. Then we teach them E plus R equals O, which is event plus response equals outcome. E plus R equals O. And the principle of that is that you do not control events. You do control how you choose to respond, and it's your response that produces the outcome. Events don't produce outcomes. Our responses do. And ERO is great because it teaches that the outcomes that you get in your life are determined by the responses that you choose. And your response is most important when the event's difficult. And don't use a difficult event as an excuse for a poor R. And it's one of the most fundamentally important things that anyone can learn. And I know you teach middle school, and I think every middle schooler should be exposed to E plus R equals O and understand that starting in middle school, understand ERO is how life works. That you have an R factor in your life, and you make R factor decisions every day. And the outcomes that you get every day are determined by how you choose to respond, not by the events. Now, events are important, and events influence you and impact you, but events are not events don't produce outcomes. Your response does. And you're going to learn, and through R factor training, how to respond to the events of your life to produce the best possible outcomes. And of course, a discipline R is very different than a default R. That's why we match those things together. If you experience an event and you respond on default, you're going to get a less than effective outcome. But the exact same event, you could respond with discipline and get a much better outcome. That's what you control. You don't control the event. You control how you respond to it. And a discipline R is very much better than a default R. And when people see and understand that, all of a sudden now this picture starts to get pretty clear about here's the pathway to a great environment, as well as this individual outcomes in my life is manage my R in an above the line discipline driven way.
You know, you kind of mentioned their R factor training. And so I've gone through this before. I've tried talking with my students about how, you know, you got to be able to overcome whatever life's going to throw at you. It's not going to go scripted and picture perfect. You're going to have things happen constantly. You get a flat tire one day, you don't plan on that kind of stuff. And so, you know, that response, you try preaching that to the students in my classroom or other teachers out there with their personal lives. But that R factor training, what does that look like where you are focusing on developing the skill set that someone has in order to be able to handle those events that life will throw their way?
Sure. Well, I'll say this, and I'll promote this a little bit here, just because it's something we're working on, and it's going to be we're providing the R factor training online through an online course. It's going to be released coming up in May, and we're super excited about it. But R factor training, and we do it live, obviously. Every year we teach it, like I said, all over the world. There are 6 R factor disciplines, 6 ways to manage the R, 6 things to do to manage your R in an above the line way. And it's a skill. Here's what they are. I'll give you the 6. And this is the result of 35 years of observation and research. This is what I've observed that consistently effective people do differently than average people. Because we all pretty much, this is interesting, we all pretty much get the same events. Like you mentioned, a flat tire. Well, at some point, you're going to get a flat tire. That's a given. It's going to happen. There's events that happen in our life that with repetition. And the variable isn't the E, the variable is the R. So here's what we see effective people do. I'll just go through them real fast and you can ask about them. But number 1 is press pause. Before you respond, slow down and think and gain clarity. That's press pause. The pause can be very brief. It can be a nanosecond. It can be a split second. It can be a couple seconds. It can be a few minutes. It depends on the situation. But number 1, press pause to gain clarity. Be clear about the E you have. Be clear about the O that you want. Be clear about the R that you need. So get clear. Number 2, get your mind right. Know how to manage your mindset. Know how to get yourself out of a bad mood into a good one. How to get yourself out of a disruptive mindset into a productive mindset. And the key is produce the energy that you need for the responses you've identified. So press pause is about clarity. Get your mind right. It's about energy. So know how to create a productive mindset for the situation that you're in. And emotional energy, positive emotional energy. Number 3 is step up. And that means do what needs to be, take the action that you need for the outcome that you want. We call it find the necessary R. For every outcome you want, there's a discipline response available. Find it and go do it. Now, it may not be comfortable and it may not be something you're very good at, but this is my point about discipline. Go do it anyway. It's the necessary R. Want that O, you can have it, but only if you do that R. I'll come back to that in a second. Number 4 is adjust and adapt. And that's monitor the outcomes that you're getting. If you're not getting the O that you want, adjust your R. Don't be stubborn. Be flexible. So that's number 4 is adjust and adapt. Number 5 is make a difference. And that is pay attention to how your R factor is affecting the people around you. Your R is an E for others. So make it great. Make a difference in the lives of others. Don't be self-centered, but be others-oriented. Be a great teammate. And then number 6 is build skill. which is all about getting better at it day after day after day. This is not about perfection. It's about progress. What did you learn today about your R factor? How did you do today in the events of your life? What kind of things did you do today that you want to repeat tomorrow? What kind of things did you do today you want to enhance and be better tomorrow? What kind of things did you do today that you don't want to do ever again? You're going to eliminate them. That's R6. So again, press pause for clarity, get your mind right for energy, step up for discipline action, adjust and adapt for flexibility, make a difference for impact on others, and R6 is build skill for growth. And those are all, that's a training program. And it's phenomenal. It's a blast to teach it. It's a blast to learn it. It's a blast to talk about it. It's a game changer. It'll make a football team better. It'll make a middle school class better. It'll make a family better, a marriage better. It'll make a manufacturing company better. It's a phenomenal skill set. I think it's the fundamental skill set in life.
You know, just kind of looking through these 6 different factors, is there one in particular you feel like people struggle with more than the other, or maybe certain groups or certain settings where you find some factors are more harder to work through than others?
Well, it's a system, Adam, and because it's a system, all of the pieces affect all the other pieces. That's the nature of a system. It's like asking, which wing of the airplane do you prefer at 30,000 feet? I kind of like both, thank you. So they all matter, and if you took one of those out, like if you took the first one out, you didn't have clarity, but you had energy, that you've been unguided missile. If you took out number 2, you get yourself wrapped up into emotional problems. And if you take out number 5, you end up being selfish and not having a positive impact on people around you. So they all matter. And having said that, I will say the hardest one by far, in my opinion, is number 2, get your mind right, because of emotion. Emotion is difficult. And many people have not been trained how to manage their emotions. And if you don't manage your emotions will manage you. And we have a saying in R Factor, where your mind goes, you go. Where your mind goes, you go. And particularly when you're confronted with challenging things, your mind either puts up barriers that hold you back, or it builds bridges that move you forward. Yeah. And what R2 is all about is building mental bridges. It's being mentally tough. It's being emotionally intelligent, knowing how to recognize and understand your own emotions, and how to harness your emotions to create the kind of energy that you need to take the action to achieve the things you want in life.
Well, those are kind of the first 2 on your 6. Those are kind of what stuck out to me as well, and especially working with younger people. A lot of time, it's really difficult to get them to just take a moment and to really do a inventory of what's going on in their own head. Kind of goes back to what we talked about a few moments ago with that metacognition. It's a high level of thinking, and it's hard to do for a reason, because you've really got to kind of step out of your own head and look at yourself in different ways. So I was kind of wondering if it was something else that y'all found to be more difficult than others, but
but you mentioned metacognition and using slightly simpler language. What R Factor is about, it's about situational awareness and self-awareness. It's about both. It's about situational awareness and self-awareness. And think of the 2 questions there. Number 1, what's going on around me? That's situational awareness. And then number 2, what's going on within me? That's self-awareness. And there's enormous benefit of having that discipline to recognize and think about situations and then me. And metacognition is this fancy term you use down there in South Carolina, but it just means self-awareness and situational awareness, which most people aren't trained in.
Exactly.
Here's something else about that. I don't think it's so much a matter of competency to be self-aware. I think it's a matter of courage. I mean, I'm 67 years old, been doing this for over 35 years. And I've taught metacognition, to use that term, or awareness, to so many people. And here's what I've discovered. The vast majority of people, when all is said and done, they know what's going on around them and within them. They just lack the courage to acknowledge it.
Yeah, that's definitely true. You can definitely tell, especially, and maybe it's just out of fear. if they don't maybe see people gaining a lot of success or doing that. Speaking on behalf of my students, a lot of them are going home to situations where they don't see anybody at the house that's doing that. And so maybe they just don't know that good things can happen if they really step out and have some courage to kind of go through these steps. So after this R factor training, so up to this point, you got them trained in how to respond. You've got this culture playbook developed. What does it look like the rest of the way? Is it just maintaining from there on out? What's the rest of that process look like to kind of cap it off?
Well, it's wonderful because R factor is a toolbox. That's a metaphor. It's a toolbox, and the only way you get value from a tool is you use it, right? I mean, that's the only way you get value from it. And you coach football. How many reps does an athlete have to do to get good at a position or a skill in football? How many reps?
Never enough. A bunch.
So E plus R equals O is no different. Press pause, get your mind right, step up, no different. And that's why what's after the training is application. And it's daily, it's constant application. And it's interesting, now you've got common language on your team. Now you've got common language in your business. Now you got common language in your classroom. Now we apply E plus R equals O to the sales process. We teach salespeople how to use E plus R equals O to sell better. We teach customer service people how to use E plus R equals O to provide better customer service. We teach E plus R equals O for safety in utilities and how to make safe decisions in response to the work projects that they're on. We teach E plus R equals O on the shop floor or in warehouses as a part of Lean Six Sigma in order to be more efficient and effective. Because how many events do you get in a day? Tons. Well, how many R factor decisions do you make in a day? Hundreds. Cool. Every one of those is an opportunity to do a rep of applying these things. And that's really what it's about. So the wise leader will then take a little bit of time, at least a couple times a week, if not briefly in a day, saying, okay, what kind of events are we getting and how are we responding and how can we get better using the toolbox? And that doesn't take a long time to have that conversation. And keep it top of mind, keep using the tool, keep using the tool, keep using the tool. And it's really effective. I got a client in Chicago area, and she runs a service line in a professional services firm, and she uses E plus R equals O to coach anybody who comes into her office. She's got ERO written in a Sharpie in the top of her whiteboard in her office. And whenever somebody comes in with a problem or a decision or issue, she turns to E plus R equals O. So let's use the system. And every conversation is framed that way. She has them identify the outcome they want, the event they have. What are your R factor options? What have we learned? And then they go execute. It's very effective.
That kind of brings me to another question. You mentioned that a wise leader would be doing these things on a weekly basis. How often, if you're with Urban Meyer at Ohio State, or you're with the leader of a business, how often do you promote to them that they need to be sitting down and evaluating what their organization is doing? Are we doing are we doing these things that we've learned through the R factor? How often do you kind of suggest to them to be evaluating the performance of their organization?
Well, when it comes to the application piece, then it's all about identifying predictable events. There's a pattern to events, and at least once a week you should be looking at what's the pattern of events that we're getting, how are we responding, and what outcomes are we producing, and how can we get better. I mean, that's at least a once a week conversation.
Mm-hmm. Tim, I appreciate all the time you give me. I know I promise I won't take up too much of your afternoon. One way I kind of like to wrap up these conversations, and it could be something we've already discussed before, or maybe something that you kind of wanted to elaborate on. Again, if you just had to give one quick summary for anybody that's out there listening, something to take away from listening to this conversation out into their own lives, what would that key to success be for them? What should these people be doing?
I'd say manage 5 things in your life. Manage your goals, manage your action, manage your attitude, manage change, and manage adversity. And that's the bridge to the next level. Manage your goals. Make sure you're aimed at specific goals. Manage your action. Make sure you're doing what your goals require. Manage your attitude. Make sure that your attitude is right. Manage change and manage adversity. And if you've got a disciplined approach to those 5 things, life's going to be good. Not easy, but good.
Tim, thank you so much. If anybody out there is listening and wants to keep up with what you guys are doing at Focus 3 or keep up with you in particular, what are some outlets that they can be searching so that they can keep up with the great things you guys are doing?
Sure. Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Timothy Kight, Kight. And also on LinkedIn, same identifier. And then our website, focus3.com. And that's a place you can go for all kinds of cool resources and ideas and blogs and stuff like that. And those are places to get a hold of us and stay in touch.
Daddy, I'm learning so much from this podcast.
Tim's years of dedication to studying the topic of leadership are a reason why he's one of the best in the business. Be sure to check out the many great resources that Focus 3 provides in order to get the most out of your organization. Let's review what Tim had to say in this lesson for success. When developing the mental edge in your program, Tim is adamant that people don't underperform because of a lack of ability to understand and process their own thoughts. Instead, they lack the tools necessary to make decisions based on the various events that life will throw their way. Tim's famous formula E+R=O has been adopted by organizations everywhere because it's proven true. Your response to situations will determine the outcome to those situations. We can't change the events that impact us in life. We're in control of the R factor in our everyday lives. Be sure to look into Focus 3 so that you can develop these R factor skills in order to give you and your team the winning edge. That's it for this episode of the Lessons for Success podcast. If you like what you heard, be sure to screenshot the episode and share it on social media. Before you close the app, be sure you subscribe to the show on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to also tune into the daily episodes of the show, as well as some of the past interviews we've had with a variety of guests. Thank you for tuning in, and see you next time on the Lessons for Success Show podcast.